Hello, Bobs. We're continuing with the Laura Mundo book, UFOs or Flying Saucers and the Father's Plan. Chapter 4, My Meeting with Orthon. It was at the convention held in Detroit during June 1957 that Orthon, the young man who Adamski had met on the California desert, in 1952, presented himself to me in person. He did not introduce himself to me as such, claiming to be a visitor. This the visitors do not do, except in particular instances where it might be a definite part of the plan, as had been the case with Adamski. The meeting on the desert, that's an odd phrasing. The meeting on the desert, which would result in a widely read book bringing the message to millions, had represented a much different case. They needed a springboard to bring people in to the work, and it had to be a dramatic occurrence. Thus, Orthon openly introduced himself to Adamski. They cannot, of course, openly introduce themselves widely, for a part of our learning and conditioning is the seeking out of them and the recognizing of them. When our Father Self, however, has recognized them, there is much they are able to do to confirm that understanding. We learn that many people could be visitors, and there comes a time in our development when we spend no further time looking for them, as the human mind would do, and putting on great spiritual manners, not necessarily indicative of our real spiritual growth. When we did formally meet them as such, the other is a truer test, not to condemn us, but to help us make corrections. Eternal damnation is a human mind idea developed by our religious authorities, and was originally, one suspects, developed as a part of the sales talk for established religion, a club to wield upon those who wish to think for themselves. Had not my capabilities for spiritual recognition been sensitive, Orthon's outward earthly appearance would have almost completely belied his true identity. He had his thick blonde hair cut in the square-necked fashion of a juvenile exhibitionist. It was draped in the back, or brushed into the pattern of what I would best describe as that of a duck's posterior, where its wingtips touch. His big blue eyes, however, were as innocent as a baby's, but most people would never get past the haircut to notice them. The haircut, I suppose, was Orthon's most effective disguise. His brown suit of a very unusual material that seemed to have a living quality about it was cut, however, in the zoot suit style of the day. He wore shoes with what we call built-up heels, certain to raise the eyebrows. He sat with an empty bottle of beer in front of him all afternoon, and with an unlighted cigarette in his hand. My soul self, or the Father through it, told me almost at once that he was Orthon, just as Mary Magdalene had recognized Jesus for himself, although his appearance had changed. And that Orthon was Enoch, which Adamski had not told us or realized. Enoch had been our first graduate, directly and alive, by way of spaceship to Venus, as the Bible states, who went with God without dying. I have described my meeting with Orthon in greater detail in other of my writings, but suffice it to say here that throughout the delegate meeting, into which he had walked, incognito and unrecognized, he had caught my eye several times, nodding assent to my unspoken questions. When I was leaving, he came to stand next to me, nodding silently toward the girl, whom I had been given silent understanding previously in my mind would be taking my place when I left the planet, sometime in the future, for a rest. The next day, Adamski told my coworkers that Orthon had been at the convention, but was surprised when they told him that I had recognized and had already informed them of the fact. Adamski, however, has never publicly admitted that Orthon was at the convention. Later, when asking Orthon if he had met me, according to Adamski's later publications, he denied that he had met me personally. Right, in a way. In other words, Adamski was given the kind of answer that he, unconsciously perhaps, wanted to hear. And especially if he had not yet learned to release any developments to the Father, Who knows what everybody has done as part of his plan? Pardon for the gong. It was at this time that it was confirmed to me that Adamski was not always hitting the father frequency in his mind. Although the father surely spoke through him at times, or the father was deliberately preventing him from doing so in order to bring about certain phases of his plan, to which Adamski no doubt had agreed. Before rebirth, of course, Adamski was taking every word of the visitors without question, which they would not personally want him to do, and thus was not always placing the correct interpretation upon what they had told him during the various contacts he had experienced with them. This, I felt certain, he would have to learn to refrain from doing, or he would be demonstrating to humanity nothing better than what Earthman is doing already doing, in blindly following his own authorities without reference to their father mind. The father is the only one who can get us through the planetary changes ahead and past the conditions of why we were demoted in the first place. Orthon continued to be interested in our group, as well as other local groups, in order to hide his beautiful translucent skin. However, he had disguised himself as a woman in order to wear a makeup base on his face. If he were recognized, his mission of being a moderator sent by the father would be nullified. We would be too excited, or rather would be our atoms that are us, to receive the energies in a balanced fashion. A more gradual approach, often including denying the truth, had to be used. Visitors sometimes take the negative roles in arguments that they often start themselves. Orthon smoked her cigarette and took a social drink as well, even claimed to receive mental messages from her boyfriend in outer space. Orthon spent time with me alone as well, calling on the phone until I had to ask her not to do so because I had work to do, trying to distract me from my vital work. My writing, which had to be done on schedule, was a test. As the closing of the circle neared, he confirmed much that had come into my mind as he talked concerning our past and future relationships as well. He sometimes traveled, probably by saucer, as I traveled any way I could to make my lecture appointments. Wait, he went from convention to convention in a saucer? That's brilliant. All right. Orthon, almost from the very beginning, would sit in the audiences to help me hold emotional balance as a lesser, of course, transmitter myself to the audience, often under most difficult circumstances. Orthon never came any closer than that in my own personal life, and when he does, I can know the end is in sight, my work becoming increasingly difficult, and the atmosphere likewise. I have met visitors at many conventions, for they are everywhere. Such meetings are only classes, and sometimes final examinations. They always recognize me or pick up my vibration or aura knowing about me, which we can do in their case only if their father's self allows it. Having heard about me in their own classes before coming to this planet, and knowing of my mission as well as of yours, they tip their hands to me in a way I cannot as yet tell you. They have their work to do, as I have mine, and they go on their ways, whether they would prefer my more stimulating company or not. When visitors walk side by side with individuals who know they are visitors or suspect it, things are becoming very bad. Or that individual at a lesser level of growth, unaware this is happening as with mankind in the main, has not yet reached the father frequency and is being aided to do so. And all this time, I have never needed visitors to hint at my saucer programming or personal saucer research steps or writings, the understandings coming silently in my mind or through others, Earth people as well, unaware of how the father might be talking through them. This help from other Earth people comes with the times when my own personal cycle is on a lower frequencies than at other times, especially during premenstrual periods, dark moon periods, etc. Sounds like she read a lot of Kant. And that's a manual, not the slang. The time came when I knew I was to reveal the name taken locally by Orthon to those on our mailing list. By that time, however, others had recognized him by themselves and had come to me for confirmation. These included Connie Grish, whom I had asked to found the planetary center with me, Carmela Falzone, who came in later, John Markser, my younger son, and Jim Wales of Baltimore, Maryland, who took the initiative on his own to advance our writings. Immediately thereafter, many who had hesitated about totally denying me and my understanding now had their proof that I was wrong in recognizing Orthon as a visitor. They seized this situation in order to find some excuse for denying the validity of my work. Some had known the individual I was saying was Orthon for several years, since the beginning of local saucer research, when she began attending lectures, proving nothing. Some went to Orthon's home where she lived with her grandmother, asking him point blank if he was Orthon, unaware he would have to deny it, especially if there were further missions the father had in mind for him. While he posed as that particular personality, the fact that the individual who I have said was Orthon helped a well-known saucer researcher, unbeknownst to himself, rebalance his negative electrons as the father transmitted higher balanced negative energy through Orthon to him in this case, with his overactive protons through meditation, whereby sex had become repellent to him. He had been a priest in his last life. Later, the researcher made a normal adjustment and married. Orthon dated him previous to his normal marriage as a woman, but only to be in close proximity with the individual, not to be intimate. Thus, the male visitor aided the homosexual to rebalance, as it is increasing due to the planetary changes, instead of condemning him. There will come a time when Enoch Orthon will have to back me up publicly, but first privately, beyond my small group of coworkers, who knew he has never denied anything to my face. God backed him up by approving publicly of his efforts to help humanity before taking him to Venus by spaceship. But for the sake of those considering what I have had to say, who must have their faiths confirmed as well sometime. But for the sake of those considering what I have had to say, who must have their faiths confirmed as well sometime. Not all have the understanding that I have, nor follow me blindly, but in order for the Father to continue making use of them at their level of understanding in a balanced fashion. Next chapter will be Lucifer Returns, but I have a little surprise before then, as relates to Orthon, he, she. All right, Bobs, I'm back. This, what you see, is the graduation book of Laura Mundo from 1925 when she was in Belmont, Maine. I got it at her son's estate. I just happened to see a listing on estatesales.net, and it showed Laura Markser, and I'm like, who is Laura Markser? I remember that name. And yes, she was Laura Mundo, Laura G. Mundo. Or is that C? That's Charlotte. Anyway, when I got the book, I noticed that on top it says Johnny Mundo. So I thought maybe she had a brother named Johnny who was a twin, or one of the two were behind or advanced in school. But her brother John, she had two brothers named John. One died in infancy, I believe, or maybe as a toddler. I can't remember exactly. And another brother was, I think, a decade older than her. So he definitely was not graduating at the same time. And this is in relation to the he, she part of Orthon and Laura's continued repeated mentioning of the he and the she, and the guy from the Saucer Life talked about it, which was ironic because it was at the same time that I found both the Saucer Life podcast and these pieces of ephemera from Laura's life that it became kind of obvious that Laura was having some kind of who knows? She graduated at 16, so she was having some kind of a crisis, identity crisis, and was calling herself Johnny, as you will see in this book. Let me find an instance. No, that doesn't say Johnny. That says Juniors. There are instances of her being called Johnny in here. So other people were calling her Johnny as well. So, mind you, this is 1929, so... What? That's crazy. As you can see, she was writing a poem there. Ask E.H. What do you think of Edison Brierly? Let's see, I probably should have marked this off before I just started looking randomly. Keith mentioned vamps, but vamps then were just attention seekers, more or less. Video vamps, baby. Where's these mentions of Johnny? I have it all on a blog post somewhere, and I probably should be referencing that, but she's too tight. Baseball. Johnny. Too hot for me. Maybe I'll do a proper... Maybe it's the one where they ask her about herself, which is at the back of the book. What do you think of the owner of this book, Laura Mundo? Where's the mentions of Johnny? Adam's apple. The boys all love Laura. Where's the mention of Johnny? There it is, right there. Don't try to... Does that say key? 2 on a string at once, Johnny. It can't be done. You'd be surprised how well she manages. At the time, she was dating a man named Ralph, who was 35, and she was 16. He was from a neighboring town, and Ralph, I believe, was a coal miner. A 35-year-old coal miner who was still living at home. So Laura was up to some shenanigans as a 16-year-old. Mind you, she had grown up poor and had 2 stepfathers. Her own father was supposedly an alcoholic, and she claims in her autobiography, Belmont, that she was raped at least twice, maybe multiple times. I know she said her brother-in-law was trying to rape her while she lived with their sister, and then also I think it was a football star at Belmont raped her fully, as she put it. As you can see, Ralph and Laura Mundo, puppy love. She's all right in her place. Where's that? In the dark? Typical French girl, but I can't read half of this stuff. Never take her out if you want to come home whole. She's mighty nice. No, she's a flirt. Is that so? She's all right in her place. What do you think of Laura? What a swell head. Oh my, what a form. Never had her. And what's that say? Never had her out. God knows you've tried. Something enough. So yeah. She was having some kind of a crisis. Or she was known as Johnny. She's too tight. It would be nice to do to look through these names and then find what happened to these people. I know Laura went to a family reunion, or not a family reunion, a high school reunion, I think like in the 60s. Maybe it was earlier. And she was the one who traveled the furthest while she was living in, who's Eleanor Brierly? Well, she was living in Dearborn, Michigan. So it was a newspaper article, and it said she had traveled the longest. I believe it was in the 60s. Maybe it was their 50th. Maybe it was the 70s. I don't know when it was. 30th, 40th anniversary. And she finally went back to her school, which graduated in 29. I wonder if there's any more mentions of Johnny. Like I said, I should be looking at the blog post that I wrote about it. And I will probably just do a entire video on that. Graduation gifts, dress, white undies, white choker, stocking, church, ball shoes, graduation dress, ensemble, hat, lingerie. What? Lingerie means something then. Arthur, her brother, bought it for her? That's creepy. What the hell? Arthur, who became the judge, bought her lingerie. Unless that means something else. Classmates. There were 76 classmates, apparently. All right, I'll end this now since I'm quite rambling. But as you see, Laura Mundo, Johnny Mundo, 29, Miss Laura Mundo. Strange that she calls herself Ms. and then Johnny. So she had already had the notion of gender fluidity in her mind by 1929, which is rather forward thinking, shall we say. Still can't get over that part. Goodbye.